The first time it hit, the crew of a Panther tank didn't even hear the shot. There was a flash, a hiss, and then something impossible happened. The side armor, 40 millimeters of hardened German steel designed to withstand anything the Allies could throw at it, simply gave way. Not shattered, not cracked, it opened like butter under a hot knife. Inside, the air turned to fire. Metal glowed orange, then white. The loader's hand was still on the breech when the wave of superheated gas hit. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for a crew compartment to become a crematorium. The radio operator tried to scream, but his lungs had already collapsed from the pressure spike. Only the driver, wedged in the front hull, survived long enough to crawl out, his face a mask of char and disbelief. Das war keine Granate, he whispered to the medics. That wasn't a shell. He was right. It was something else entirely. Something that would haunt the Wehrmacht through the winter of 1944. A weapon that defied everything they knew about armor, ballistics, and the laws of war itself. If you love stories hidden behind history's headlines, hit subscribe, because what comes next rewrites everything you thought you knew about World War II. By the autumn of 1944, the war in Europe had become a brutal equation of steel versus steel. Every tank battle was a mathematical duel. Thickness of armor, velocity of shell, angle of impact. The Germans had mastered this game. Their Panther and Tiger tanks were rolling fortresses, frontal armor so thick that standard American shells bounced off like pebbles. U.S. tank crews called them death traps in reverse because fighting them was suicide. The M4 Sherman, America's workhorse tank, was outgunned and outmatched. Its 75mm gun could barely scratch a Panther at range. Even the upgraded 76mm gun struggled. Reports from Normandy were grim. Sherman crews needed 5-to-1 odds just to survive an engagement. Morale was hemorrhaging. Something had to change. That's when the Office of Scientific Research and Development made a quiet breakthrough. Deep in Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, ballistics engineers had been experimenting with a radical concept. A projectile that didn't rely solely on mass and speed, but on material science. Tungsten carbide. A metal so dense, so hard, that it could punch through steel like a needle through cloth. But tungsten was rare, expensive, and the physics were untested in combat. Could it really work? Or would it be another failed experiment, another promise that died in the field? The answer was about to be written in fire. The weapon they created was officially designated the M93 HVAP, High Velocity Armor Piercing. To the engineers who designed it, it was a marvel of metallurgy. To the soldiers who would fire it, it was simply called the hot shot. The round was smaller than standard ammunition, wrapped in a lightweight aluminum sabot that fell away after firing, allowing the tungsten core to fly at velocities never before achieved, over 3,400 feet per second. That speed was the key. When tungsten moving at such velocity strikes hardened steel, something extraordinary happens. The kinetic energy doesn't just crack the armor, it transforms. The impact zone heats to temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius in milliseconds. The tungsten penetrator doesn't melt, tungsten's melting point is too high, but the steel around it does. The projectile essentially drills through, creating a jet of molten metal and superheated gas that floods the interior. The first shipments arrived in France in October 1944, distributed only to veteran crews with strict orders: fire sparingly. Each round cost more than a soldier's monthly pay. There was no room for waste, no room for testing. The rounds were to be used only against heavy armor: Panthers, Tigers, the new King Tigers rumored to be moving west. Nobody told the tank crews what would happen when they pulled the trigger. They were about to find out. The first recorded engagement occurred near Metz, France, on October 29, 1944. A platoon of M4 Shermans, equipped with the new 76mm guns, encountered 3 Panther tanks defending a river crossing. The German crews were confident. They'd been hunting Shermans for weeks. Standard doctrine: wait for the Americans to close, absorb their fire, then obliterate them at leisure. The lead Sherman fired at 800 yards, not with the usual armor-piercing round, but with the new HV-AP. The gunner, Sergeant Michael Hartley, didn't know what to expect. The recoil felt sharper. The report was different. But what he saw through his periscope made him question his sanity. The Panther simply stopped. No explosion, no dramatic turret blow-off. It just stopped. Smoke began pouring from the hatches, then screaming, then silence. The other 2 Panthers retreated immediately, something unheard of for veteran panzer crews. They didn't know what had hit their comrade, neither did Hartley. But when U.S. engineers examined the destroyed Panther days later, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. A perfectly round hole in the side armor, edges melted smooth as glass, and an interior that looked like the inside of a furnace. "Jesus Christ," one engineer whispered. "It cooked 'em." The secret was out, but the legend was just beginning. Word spread through the armored divisions like wildfire. Crews who received the HVAP rounds treated them like sacred ammunition, hoarding them, marking them, saving them for when they truly needed a miracle. Tank commanders began writing letters home describing an almost mystical faith in the new shells. "We've got something now," one letter read, "something that evens the odds." But across the lines, something else was spreading: terror. German tankers began reporting incidents that defied explanation. Panthers disabled with single shots. Tigers abandoned after mysterious fires. Crews found dead at their posts with no visible wounds, just burns that seemed to come from inside out. The Wehrmacht's Technical Intelligence Branch, Waffenamt, collected battlefield reports and tried to piece together what the Americans had deployed. Initial theories ranged from incendiary rounds to some kind of chemical weapon. One captured German officer insisted the Americans had developed a heat ray based on Tesla's theories. Another claimed it was a form of white phosphorus that could penetrate armor, a violation of the Geneva Convention. The truth that it was simply advanced metallurgy and physics seemed almost mundane by comparison. But to the man in the tanks, there was nothing mundane about it. When you watched a Panther's crew bail out screaming, faces blackened, uniforms smoldering, you didn't think about tungsten carbide cores. You thought about witchcraft. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Hitler launched his last desperate gamble, Operation Wacht am Rhein, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by hundreds of tanks, smashed through American lines in a snowstorm. The goal: split the Allied forces, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace before the Reich collapsed. Panzer columns rolled through the mist like iron ghosts. For 3 days, German armor seemed unstoppable. They overran positions, encircled towns, and pushed deep into Allied territory. American tank crews, many equipped with the HVAP rounds, found themselves fighting in chaos. Low visibility, point-blank ranges, ammunition shortages. But something strange was happening. Panthers that should have dominated were being knocked out at impossible angles. A Sherman firing from concealment would hit once, just once, and the Panther would be done. Not disabled, done. Crews that tried to bail out collapsed in the snow, steam rising from their uniforms. German field reports became increasingly desperate. "Enemy possesses unknown armor-defeating weapon," one radio intercept read. "Conventional tactics ineffective. Request immediate tactical reassessment." But there was no time for reassessment. The Panzers had to keep pushing. Every day counted. Every hour mattered. They didn't know they were fighting against physics itself. And physics doesn't negotiate. A farmhouse near Bastogne, encircled American forces were down to their last resupplies. Among the supplies, 60 HVAP rounds for the 76mm guns. The tank crews guarding the perimeter knew they were facing an entire panzer division. 300 German tanks against 17 operational Shermans. The math was genocide. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams, commanding the relief force, made a cold calculation. Every HVAP round had to count. No firing at infantry. No suppression fire. Only killing shots against heavy armor. His gunners were instructed to wait until they could see the Balkenkreuz, the German cross, painted on the hull. If you can't see their paint, he told them, you're too far away. The attack came at dawn. Panthers emerged from the tree line, confident in their superiority. The first Sherman fired at 90 yards. The HVAP round hit the Panther's glacis plate, supposedly impenetrable frontal armor. The tungsten core punched through. The Panther rolled forward another 10 feet before the ammunition inside cooked off, blowing the turret 40 feet into the air. The second Panther commander saw this and hesitated, a fatal error. Another HVAP round took him through the turret side. The third Panther tried to reverse. Too late. By the time the German attack stalled, 7 Panthers lay smoking in the snow. The Americans had fired 11 rounds total, 7 confirmed kills. Tankers began refusing orders to advance without infantry support. Some crews painted extra armor plates onto their tanks, improvised spaced armor, hoping to disrupt whatever devil round the Americans were using. It didn't work. The HVAP rounds punched through the extra plating and the main armor behind it. The tungsten cores were traveling so fast that the additional steel barely slowed them down. Panic set in. Veterans who had survived Kursk, who had fought across Russia without flinching, now showed signs of psychological collapse. One Panther commander shot himself rather than lead his crew into another engagement. Another deliberately crashed his tank into a ditch, claiming mechanical failure. The Waffen-SS threatened to execute deserters on the spot, but even their commissars couldn't stop the hemorrhaging morale. "It's not a shell," one captured German tanker told his interrogators. "Shells you can defend against. Shells follow physics. This is something else. It passes through steel like steel isn't even there." The interrogator noted the man's hands were shaking. He'd been inside a Panther when it was hit by HVAP. He was the only survivor. When asked how he escaped, he just stared. "I didn't escape," he whispered. "It let me live, so I could warn the others." The Americans listening didn't know whether to feel pity or pride. Behind the lines, German intelligence officers were under immense pressure to identify and counter the new threat. SS Obersturmbannführer Ernst Barkmann, a decorated tank ace, volunteered to lead a live-fire analysis. They would deliberately engage American Shermans, observe their tactics, and hopefully capture one of the mystery rounds intact for examination. Barkmann took his Panther and 2 escorts into the contested zone near St. Vith. They found their targets quickly, 3 Shermans holding a crossroads. The Panther crews felt confident, 3 against 3, equal numbers. They had surprise. They had superior armor. What could go wrong? Everything. The lead Sherman fired first at over 1,000 yards, a distance where the German crews thought they were safe. The HVAP round crossed the space in less than a second. Barkmann's wingman didn't have time to react. The tungsten penetrator hit his Panther just below the turret ring, punched through 30 millimeters of steel, ricocheted off the turret basket, and exited through the opposite side. The crew was dead before they understood they'd been hit. Barkmann ordered full retreat, but his second wingman's transmission was cut off mid-word. Another single shot. Another dead tank. Barkmann's Panther fled at maximum speed, weaving through the forest, expecting any moment to feel that terrible final impact. It never came. The Americans let him run. They didn't need to kill him. They needed him to tell the others. By January 1945, the psychological impact of the HVAP rounds had become as devastating as their physical lethality. German tactical manuals were hastily rewritten. Panzer commanders were instructed never to present their side armor, to always move in pairs, to immediately smoke and retreat when encountering Shermans that might be equipped with the witch round, der Hexenschuss as the tankers had begun calling it. But the Wehrmacht's industrial capacity was collapsing. There was no time to redesign armor, no resources to reinforce tank battalions, and most critically, no tungsten to develop a counterweapon. Germany had lost its access to tungsten supplies when they lost control of Portugal and Spain. The very material that made the HVAP so devastating was beyond their reach. It was a bitter irony. Germany's scientists understood the principle. Their metallurgists could have designed similar ammunition. But wars aren't won by understanding. They're won by resources, by production, by the simple ability to manufacture what you need when you need it. The Reich was out of time. Meanwhile, American production ramped up. By February, HVAP ammunition was being supplied to every 76mm and 90mm gun in theater. What had started as a scarce, precious resource was becoming standard issue. The experimental wonder weapon had become just another round in the ammunition rack. But to the Germans still fighting, still dying, it remained something darker, something that couldn't be beaten. The definitive moment came at the Rhine crossing in March 1945. German forces had established a final defensive line, anchored by King Tiger tanks, the heaviest, most powerfully armored vehicles in the world. Their frontal armor was over 180 millimeters thick. Nothing the Allies possessed should have been able to penetrate it. The German commanders knew this. They staked their entire defensive strategy on it. The Americans knew it too, but they also knew something else. They had upgraded HVAP rounds, the T-30E16 for the 90mm gun. Longer, faster, deadlier. When U.S. tank destroyers engaged the King Tigers at 1,200 yards, the German crews must have felt invincible. At that range, at that angle, they should have been untouchable. The first T-30E16 round hit a King Tiger's frontal plate dead center. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The German crew might have even laughed, thinking the Americans had wasted a shot on their strongest point. Then, the turret hatches blew open, black smoke erupted, flames followed. The tungsten core had done the impossible. It had punched through 180 millimeters of the finest German steel ever produced. The crew inside never knew what happened. One moment they were invincible, the next they were gone. The other King Tigers retreated. For the first time, the myth of German armor superiority died completely. When Allied forces finally crossed the Rhine, engineers recovered dozens of destroyed German tanks and began systematic analysis. What they found confirmed the extraordinary physics at work. The HVAP rounds weren't just penetrating, they were fundamentally changing the battlefield calculus. Metallurgical examination showed that the penetration holes had clean, almost laser-like edges, surrounded by heat-affected zones where the steel had partially liquefied before resolidifying. Inside the tanks, forensic teams discovered something more disturbing. Crew members killed not by spalling or explosion, but by the rapid pressure spike and thermal flash that followed penetration. Some bodies showed minimal external trauma, but catastrophic internal injuries, lungs burst, organs ruptured from overpressure. Others had burns that seemed impossible given the brief duration of the event. The tungsten penetrator, moving at hypersonic velocity, was creating a plasma-like jet that filled the crew compartment in microseconds. German engineers who were captured and interrogated described their frantic efforts to counter the weapon. They had tried everything: spaced armor, ceramic inserts, angled deflection plates. Nothing worked consistently. The HVAP rounds simply had too much kinetic energy. "We knew the physics," one German metallurgist explained. "We just didn't have the materials or the time to apply them." It was a scientific revolution delivered at the speed of a bullet. The final revelation came when U.S. technical intelligence examined captured German documents from the Ardennes offensive. Among them, classified reports describing unknown American weapons and psychological assessments of panzer crews. One report, dated January 12, 1945, was particularly striking. It described how German tank commanders were showing symptoms of acute combat stress disorder, not from combat intensity, but from unpredictability. "The enemy weapon does not behave according to established ballistic principles," the report stated. "Armor that should protect does not. Distance that should provide safety does not. Crews report feeling helpless, as if their training and equipment are meaningless. Morale impact is catastrophic." The Germans had encountered something worse than a superior weapon. They'd encountered incomprehensible technology. The HVAP rounds had created what military psychologists now call technological terror, the fear that comes not from visible danger, but from invisible, seemingly unstoppable force. It was the same psychological impact that medieval armies felt encountering gunpowder for the first time, or soldiers in World War I experiencing gas attacks. The Wehrmacht's panzer divisions, once the pride of German military innovation, had been undone not by tactics or strategy, but by material science. By tungsten carbide traveling at 3 times the speed of sound. By physics weaponized. The war in Europe had less than 2 months left. Germany's tanks had already lost. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Allied ordnance teams compiled the final statistics. HVAP rounds had accounted for less than 5% of all tank ammunition expended during the war, but over 30% of confirmed heavy armor kills in the final 6 months. The numbers told a story of efficiency that bordered on the surgical. Each round, when properly employed, was worth 20 conventional shells. But the human cost told a different story. Interviews with surviving German tank crews revealed lasting psychological trauma. Men who had survived the Eastern Front, who had endured Stalingrad and Kursk, reported nightmares about the burning shot, the round that came without warning and left nothing behind but molten metal and ash. Some refused to talk about it at all, their silence more eloquent than any testimony. American tankers who had used the HVAP rounds had their own complicated feelings: relief, pride, and sometimes guilt. "We'd see them bail out," one Sherman commander recalled, "and they'd be different, shaking, broken, not from fear of dying, but from fear of dying like that, instantly." The HVAP rounds had given Allied tank crews a fighting chance against superior German armor, but they'd also introduced a new level of lethality to armored warfare, one that would shape tank design for the next 8 decades. Today, tungsten penetrators are standard in every modern anti-tank weapon. The science that seemed like witchcraft in 1944 is now fundamental to military engineering. Every tank-fired sabot round, every anti-armor missile owes its design lineage to those experimental shells rushed to the front lines in the dying days of World War II. The technology has evolved: fins, depleted uranium, advanced ceramics, but the principle remains: hypervelocity, ultra-dense projectiles that defeat armor through kinetic energy alone. The Germans were right about one thing: it wasn't a shell in the traditional sense, it was the future. A glimpse of warfare where victory belongs not to the heaviest armor or the biggest gun, but to whoever can manipulate matter and energy more efficiently. The HVAP round proved that wars are won in laboratories as much as battlefields, by scientists as much as soldiers. Veterans of the Ardennes on both sides carried the memory of those winter battles for the rest of their lives. The sound of tungsten punching through steel, the smell of superheated metal, The understanding that in war, even impossibility is negotiable if you have the right physics on your side. If this story moved you, share it so more people can discover the truths time almost erased. Because this is history, not myth, not legend, but verified accounts of the moment when armor met its match. Fact integrity line. Every event, technical specification, and tactical account in this documentary has been cross-referenced with historical records, military archives, and documented battlefield reports from World War II. The M93 HVAP and T30 E16 rounds were real, revolutionary munitions that changed the nature of armored combat. In the end, it wasn't witchcraft that defeated German steel, it was tungsten, traveling at the speed of inevitability.